Cyrus.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm just waiting for a cue from our esteemed producer, Abhishek, Mr. Tharoor. One second. Can we start? I've just got the cue, a thumbs up. So here we are, live with the one and only Dr. Shashi Tharoor. And do you really knows who you are? They gave me 3 pages.
Oh my gosh, what's all that? Remember, it comes across inverted. So I'll need a mirror to read it, whatever you're showing me.
I failed physics. There's no point getting to that. Anyway, it's all things you know about yourself. United Nations, three-time MP, writer of many books, and many other accomplishments. We're not short on space, don't worry. This is a full Chamchagiri episode. It's all a tribute to you. There will be nothing controversial or silly. There will be only nice things said. This is India from the old days.
The one and only Cyrus Broacha not being controversial or silly. That's impressive, Cyrus.
Well, I come to you like a human watermelon, I thought, presenting myself the truth of thought. But actually, this is so younger audience, younger than you, and younger than me, about 25 and lots of questions have come in to the last. And they all, just at the time I was doing a Zoom call, asking some of the ladies on the call, this rockstar appeal, whether you like it or not.
I'm sorry, Cyrus, the sound is terrible. I'm missing most of that. Can you repeat that again? Can you get a little closer to your phone or your mic or whatever?
I have a human phone operator, so don't worry. Yeah.
The human phone operators now cut you off except for the top of your head and the air conditioner or whatever it is above you.
Ability was not an issue when they joined the job, so that was not a criteria of any kind. But we have labor issues in India. People need work, lockdown, etc. So we're employing this 87-year-old man who's got very little time left on. Uncle, that's fine. Yeah, I wanted to just start quickly. So I was having this conversation on another platform, and I had to leave it. So I said, look, I've got a very important meeting with Dr. Shashi Tharoor. They said, oh, whatever. And then one of the girls started giggling. So I said, it's amazing that we seem to have this rockstar presence with the ladies. I don't want to praise you too much, but it irritates me after some time. Because some men have that quality where wherever they go, you can see them in the room. They're like, here comes a charming man. And that bugs me. I've seen that with Imran Khan, dare I say, the cricketer. I've seen that, with some film stars, some actors, some men of presence and power. I didn't see that with Salman Rushdie, who I didn't particularly find attractive. Not that you shouldn't find males attractive if you're a male. But I was stunned at the kind of response you get from the ladies. So I must, A, congratulate you, and B, I'm going to watch very closely going forward, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, because there's something in your body language which we have to learn. There's some way that you conduct yourself with us, like the males, we'll have to figure it out so that we follow in your footsteps. That being said, don't reply to it. There's no tangible answer to these kind of questions. But I'll just make that observation. Now I will talk less and you will talk more, thank God. So these are questions, Dr. Tharoor. Do you prefer Shashi, Dr. Tharoor, Mr. Tharoor, Sir Tharoor, Tharoor Ji, Saab,
Whatever you like, Cyrus, as long as you don't throw anything. You're welcome to call me Shashi. You're welcome to call me whatever you want. It's your call. And I must say that it's great to see you. I have to say that if you were paying me compliments, which is what it seemed, I couldn't hear most of them. There is definitely an audio problem at your end. But having said that, I want to say that if you want to pay me compliments, you're most welcome to do so. You can call me anything you like, as long as you're being nice to me.
No, listen, we are big fans, Mr. Tharoor. Let's not gush anymore, otherwise they'll lock us up together forever. I have got lots of interesting questions for you. Now, first I want to ask you, again off the bat, are you a little irritated sometimes with this chap or this avatar of yours that people have given you of being this guy with this fabulous vocabulary? Because let's face it now, everybody, you mentioned Shashi Tharoor, immediately they say, oh wow, either they make a funny joke about the language, or we actually Tharoor words ourselves, Me and my good friend Kunal, we just sit all day, bored out of our mind and make up English words which sound correct, like obnoxious, and then I'll say, it means a person of low income. So how do you take that? How do you feel about this sort of avatar of yours that is being given to you and earned?
Well, I'll be honest and say that I take it as a bit of a joke all around because, in fact, I mean, I accept that I started it unwittingly myself, all by lashing out at a particularly obnoxious news anchor who had just recited over 2 hours a series of lies about me. And so I denounced him for having issued a farrago of misrepresentations, distortions, and outright lies. And the result became that suddenly every word on that, but particularly the word farrago, managed to get a major spike in meaning searches on various sites. And the Oxford English Dictionary even tweeted saying, "Why did farrago get 1 million searches from India today?" And people had to explain to the OED, no less, what happened, and thus was my notoriety born. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I had actually assumed that most people would know what I was saying, and I clearly was chastened to realize that that was not the case. But then, after the inevitable jokes subsided and various people opened fake Twitter accounts with names like Mr. Farrago and Farrago Official and God knows what else, I said, listen, the best thing to do is to take this on your side rather than be defensive about it. So then I started playing along with the joke. And you may remember when a certain politician who had been elected alongside the Congress party then actually switched sides and went over to the side he had campaigned against in midterm. I just tweeted one word. I said, snollygoster, definition, a shrewd, unprincipled politician, first use 1845 USA, most recent use today. And I didn't need to mention his name or his state or the incident. Everyone knew what I was talking about. And that became then a new word for people to bandy about. And then I doubled down on this. So when I was releasing my book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, what I did was to issue, instead of just announcing, here's my new book coming out, which is what I've done more innocently for my forthcoming book. On that occasion, I tweeted a thing saying, my new book is more than just a 500-page exercise in floxy nosi nihilipilification. And saying floxy nosi nihilipilification then created, if you like, a new search for that and about. So it became essentially a joke. Now, sometimes a joke is taken, I think, in a silly direction. I've received, as I'm sure you have, dozens of WhatsApp memes saying, you know, this is Shashi Tharoor describing Christmas, and there'll be a whole string of illogical words put together. There will be Diwali or Happy Birthday, all of those. They make fairly silly things. A slightly cleverer version is my version of Jack and Jill went up the hill, and they have all sorts of tall words for that. The only one I found really funny was the meme that goes around saying, I used to think I was poor, then I met Tharoor and realized I'm impecunious, which I thought was not bad. I thought that brought a smile to my face. But, you know, beyond the point, you have no choice but to play along, Cyrus. I don't speak like that. I pride myself on being a fairly effective communicator, and you can't communicate if people don't understand what you're saying. That's common sense. Therefore, I will admit that a lot of what I'm actually about, to be honest, is direct, simple, and clear communication. And the big words are either when once in a while I use a word that I consider appropriate but many people don't know, or sometimes I use a big word just to get a laugh out of it and to poke fun at myself.
But it's also a little bit of word bullying, right? Isn't it? Because in the case of that TV newscaster, humanitarian of the year now, I think, for the last I mean, there was it's a civilized punch in the jaw kind of thing. Because, you know, the guy, he's taken aback by the word, has to go and search for it, and loses a little momentum.
Well, I mean, the truth is that, you know, it's gone well beyond any individual or any particular single incident. It's now become something that's hung around my neck. Even today, my doctor in Trivandrum sent me something that one of his doctor colleagues had passed him, which was a leave application by a subordinate, using such a lot of ridiculously incomprehensible long words to justify his request for leave, that there were some not entirely complimentary comments about having learned from me. And you know, I thought, God saying, don't blame me, I don't talk like this, I don't write like this. But anyway.
All right, have you ever, Shashi, this is a tough question, have you ever lied though? Have you ever made up a word? Maybe at a cocktail party or whatever, if people pressurize you, give us a good one.
No, I tried to make up words in some of my early writing. They never caught on, and then I stopped because I think it's more fun using words that are words that other people also know. So I tend not to invent words. There is a word in Tharurosaurus for that kind of fake word that sounds authentic but is actually spurious, and that's cromulent, which is a fake word invented on The Simpsons with that meaning. Yeah, absolutely. To justify, it's an amusing story because apparently what happened was that a character in The Simpsons, I think, trying to use the word enlarges, instead said embiggens. And embiggens obviously is wrong English. But one of the teachers in that character's life or school or whatever said, no, that's a perfectly cromulent word. And that made it sound very appreciative and correct and so on. People let it go. Except the word cromulent doesn't exist either. It was invented for the show. And then cromulent became a synonym for something that sounds authentic but is actually spurious. And so I've used it in Tharurosaurus to describe some of the government's pronouncements and some of the government's schemes as being cromulent. I mean, that's the sort of...
Amazing. So what we're learning here live is that Dr. Shashi Tharoor, word expert, is actually a student of The Simpsons. That's a beautiful moment. And I'm a big fan of The Simpsons myself. All right, shall we go to the first question? This is from Dr. Ravi Shastri, not the cricketer. How do you write a book, sir? It takes a year to write a book. You write 10 in that much time. Tips for budding authors? Is there a process? Is there a structure?
I mean, I'm now 64, perish the thought. And in these 64 years, I've only produced 22 books. I wouldn't say I've been able to produce 10 books a year. This year was somewhat prolific, largely because a book that my friend Samir Saran and I actually wrote in 2019 was published in January 2020. That's The New World Disorder. That came out at the beginning of the year. We couldn't promote it much because of the lockdown. A book that I had done on my own, which was almost completed, which I completed at the beginning of the year, was Tharurosaurus. That would have been launched on the 1st of May, but thanks to the lockdown and the shutdown and everything, including publishing houses and bookshops, it only got launched in September. And that sort of brought it up into collision with the book I really completed this year in much, I wrote most of it this year, and that is The Battle of Belonging, which now comes out on the 1st of November. So the unusual succession of books, 3 books this year, but it's really not, they would not all have been coming like Bombay buses, one after the other at the same stop, except for this unusual combination of circumstances.
But how long does it take? I mean, again, this is a ridiculous question, but if you had to average, how long would it take you to write a book?
You can't average it, but I do tend to write. Once I get into the theme of the book, I tend to write every day, and as many hours as I can get, including at the expense of sleep. So what I tend to do, for example, my best known book still is my first novel, The Great Indian Novel, and people are a bit astonished to realize that I wrote it over just a year and a half. But I didn't need to do much research because it was full of incidents and stories from history and from the Mahabharata that I knew inside out, and didn't need to go and sort of start doing any research for. And so I literally wrote pretty much every evening after a day's work. And I was junior enough in the UN that the day's work actually ended at 8 p.m. and didn't invade my nights and weekends in those days. And then if you take something like Tharurosaurus, I built it up over time because for almost a year, about a year, I had a column in a newspaper of a word of the week. So I would really write to their deadline, write a word a week, and they built up. And though the book obviously has gone well beyond the column and has also expanded even what was published in the column, so the book entries are a little more substantial. Nonetheless, I could therefore say that it took me about a year and a half to write Tharurosaurus. Obviously, the number of hours devoted to Tharurosaurus are much less than the hours devoted to The Great Indian Novel. And so it goes. It's like the famous question, how long is a ball of string, right? I mean, string can be of any length, and the time you take on books can be of any length. Certainly, The Battle of Belonging involved a lot of research, as did An Era of Darkness. Whereas some of my other books have borrowed from, for example, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, in a sense, it took about 4 years because some of the things I started observing, analyzing, and writing about Mr. Modi's government were published soon after he came to power and thereafter. And so I had to pull a lot of that together and reformulate them as a substantive book over 4 years of thinking, analysis, and writing.
Has he read the book?
I doubt it very much.
Have you sent a copy?
No, the only book of mine that I actually presented to him, in which I certainly felt that I owed him a duty to presenting it, was because he was kind enough to praise me on that subject, was my book on British colonialism, An Era of Darkness, where you may remember he had been publicly very generous about my speech at Oxford that triggered off the whole debate that then culminated in the book, and that thereafter has helped change in many ways the discourse on colonialism, not least in the UK. So I do feel that in many ways it's been something that he and I would not have our usual political differences on. So I presented, first of all, I offered to present it to him. He graciously accepted, and I went and there is a picture of him receiving my book. But when I'm writing political books that are critical of him, I don't think it would be courteous to try and offer them to him. So I actually backed off from there.
Fair enough. So do you write more while you're in opposition or when you're in power?
Oh, definitely in opposition. In government, especially if you're a minister, your days are very full. And there's also a lot of official obligations after hours. I mean, the number of ribbons you cut and the number of events you inaugurate and the books you launch and the official travels you undertake will make sure that you don't have any spare time to read, let alone to write. So opposition is a better place if you want to be a writer. I mean, Arun Jaitley would have confirmed the same thing. He was quite prolific when he was in opposition.
I would have thought that if you were in government, you could just chill, hang back, and then write everything, do whatever. The world functions at your command.
I wish that were true. Not in India in particular, no.
Okay. Now we're going to go into the Tharoor, which has, apparently this girl has asked, has many English words. What's the reason behind this? And do they qualify?
No, it just has a couple of, you mean English with an H, right? As in No, I've only got 2.5. I mean, 2 being Satyagraha and Namaste, but in both cases, they have an international resonance that make them regular, unitalicized words in English language dictionaries. Satyagraha, because when Gandhiji came up with it, he wasn't in India, he was in South Africa. And he actually called for an English language newspaper in South Africa to have a competition to replace the term that British journalists were using to describe his campaign of civil disobedience. And that was passive resistance. He said, what do you mean passive resistance? If you care enough about something, you're going to be very active in fighting for it. And therefore, it can't be passive resistance. Let's think of a better term. And so he conducted a public campaign, and that's where the word Satyagraha emerged from. And though it comes from Sanskrit roots, English words all come from various ancient languages, Greek and Latin and also Sanskrit. So that was why Satyagraha fits into an English language narrative. And Namaste, because of its current popularity in the era of coronavirus, where even the French president is going around greeting his fellow heads of government and heads of state like this. So that's why it's there. When I said 2.5, the other half is a word that the Western lexicographers do not attribute to India, and that's goon. But I argue in the book as to why I believe it is actually derived from the Hindi word gunda, just as loot didn't exist in the English language until the British stole it from Hindi and took loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits.
Oh, wait, that's true. Now when you think about it, goon doesn't sound like part of gunda. I want it back. I'm going to have to call up the goon myself on this one. How dare they do? Shashi, your favorite words among the 53 words in the book and why?
My favorite words amongst the words in the book, the truth is that I can't say that I actually have favorite words per se, because I love all words. I mean, I often, when I was asked to name a favorite word by a high school student, I said my favorite word is read. Because honestly, that's how I acquired my vocabulary. It was essentially by reading widely and indiscriminately. And when you come across new words, I never bothered to look them up in a dictionary, because if I read widely enough, I would find 2 or 3 references or usages of a particular word in 2 or 3 different contexts or stories. Usually I was reading fiction in those days. And you would figure out quickly what the word meant and how it was meant to be used. and the nuance and so on. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there are favorite words as such. But I must say, since you've given me an irresistible opening, let me pick out two. One is kakistocracy, because it's a form of government in which the least qualified or most unprincipled individuals are in power. And I'm afraid there are many things in our country that would suggest we are living in a kakistocracy. Did you hear my desire to defenestrate the kakistocracy?
Well, you started. Let's say the first 5 overs we captured, and then we lost it. So we could just redo that one again for those who just.
Okay, so you had asked me for favorite words. I'd explained why my favorite word is actually read, and that I don't pick any particular words. But then I said kakistocracy, which means governance or rule by the most unprincipled and least qualified individuals, and defenestrate, which means literally to throw out of the window. And metaphorically, in these more civilized times where you can't throw people out of the window, it simply means rejecting something, kicking something out, throwing it out. And so I said, if you want me to use my 2 words from the book in one sentence, it would be, let's defenestrate our kakistocracy. And that's when the power cut happened.
Exactly. Let's just mention that you're discussing North Korean politics here, just to keep people at ease.
Or Donald Trump for the election, if you prefer.
Donald Trump, may he live forever. Okay, there are a couple of other words that, by popular demand, people want to understand from your own very lips. What is this word? Is the P silent? Precocious. Precocious or negocious. Pnecocious.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you terribly well, but it doesn't sound like a word from my book, is it?
It's from the book. Pnecocious. So negocious with a P.
No, that's not a word I know. It's not from the book, Cyrus. It's not a word. It's not a word I've come across. No.
I accept it. Dr. Tharoor will not have torn it up completely. It'll never be repeated again. Oh, there's another
unless it was meant to be precocious, which is somebody who at a very young age.
Yeah, we'll call that many times. What about fissiparous? Fisssiparous.
So fissiparous tendencies are tendencies that divide and break up things, you know. So, for example, if you have a large country, let's say the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it breaks up because of various fissiparous tendencies, that the Serbians wanted independence, the Croatians wanted independence, you know, different groups wanted to break off. Austria and Hungary itself broke off into separate countries. So the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed in a welter of fissiparous tendencies. That's fissiparous. And we have to.
I like the way we segued into European history, a much safer pastime. Yes, yes.
Yeah, the power didn't cut.
Nothing happened. We're good to go. We can discuss the Austro-Hungarian Empire forever. There's one more word. This is my favorite actually. I hope this is from your book because the research artist I have here, I must tell you, Brobdingnagian. I'll just spell it out. Brobdingnagian.
Oh, Brobdingnagian. That's from Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. So, yeah, you know, you had the Lilliputians who were the very small people, and you had the Brobdingnagians who were the very big people. So something that's gargantuan and gigantic would be the Brobdingnagian. Yeah.
Almost knew that. Okay, before I think we're running out of time. Apparently, we'll get into audience questions. I'll just do one more here. I'm going to give you a word, and you have to give me the meaning of the word. All right? Are you ready?
I hope so.
Rastocorious.
Now, Rasta is a Jamaican sort of pop artist. Corious doesn't correspond to any familiar ending of any root word that I'm aware of. So I would assume this is Cyrus Broacha speak and not from the OED.
I doff my cap to you, sir, if I had one. I do. I made the sound on the elevator coming up. Yeah, I just thought it sounded correct. We thought we'd try and spin one, but obviously you heard many and you're not falling for it. All right. So currently 2 questions from the audience who's following. So they've been asking things non-stop and now suddenly I can't find any because they're just putting their thumbs ups and voting for you. You've got a lot of votes today. In case there was an election, good news.
Good. Tell the vote to move to Thiruvananthapuram and elect me.
Yes. Or I I think India is a free country. You can vote for any constituency from anywhere. Here's a question. As a youth, I can't control my desire to defenestrate and, oh, he's mentioned catastocracy as well. Good.
Yeah, good.
Would you reply to his comment? As a youth, I can't control my desire to defenestrate. Defenestrate.
Right. So what's the question?
There's no question. It's a comment. Would you like to react to it?
That was my statement, Cyrus. I said to you that let's defenestrate the catastocracy, right?
Oh, it's your statement. There you go. Excellent. Anchor at his best. Sir, as per you, what is as per you? Okay. So obviously you haven't read the thesaurus yet. So, as per your thinking, what is the key to become a good diplomat?
You know, essentially, diplomacy is again about communicating, resolving issues through being able to persuade other people. And therefore, I think there are two things. One is an ability to listen, an ability to understand issues, and then an ability to convey your point of view in a way that's effective and persuasive that doesn't cause offense. Those are qualities, by the way, that's not only essential for good diplomats, but I think for good human beings in any large society like ours, where we're dealing with people from different social backgrounds, different language groups, different religions, different communities. We need to be able to communicate with people and be understanding of them, listen to them and seek to see who they are, etc. All of these things, it seems to me, are the keys not only to being a good diplomat, but to being a good citizen in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilinguistic country like ours.
Also not committing. I think as a good diplomat, you shouldn't commit. That's what I got out of the Westminster, my training.
No, I think a good diplomat should be one who, when he or she commits, intends to keep that commitment. I think that their credibility will disappear very quickly if they don't commit at all.
All right. There's a question from somebody saying, does Shashi Tharoor read and write in Malayalam? How proficient are you with the mother tongue?
No, I'm actually Kerala's sole surviving illiterate. Because I was born in London, brought up in Bombay, high school in Calcutta, college in Delhi, worked, graduate school in the US, worked in Geneva, Singapore, and New York. I had no opportunity to learn Malayalam. And so I had picked up Malayalam from the family's annual visits home on vacations to Kerala. And thank God, has blessed me with a good ear. So I'm able to listen to and absorb the words that I pick up and so on. And then when I entered politics and I had to conduct all my interactions in Malayalam, I rapidly got better because I had no choice. I mean, I literally, it was like being thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool without having had a single lesson and being told you have to survive. Either you'd sink or swim. I managed to swim. So I now make speeches in Malayalam all the time, but I've struggled to teach myself to read. I can read a newspaper headline, but if I look at a dense page of prose, it'll be much more, shall we say, time-consuming than if somebody just read it out to me. So that's one of the reasons why I should be no threat to any politician in Kerala, because I know enough Malayalam to appeal for votes, but then I have to speak English and Hindi to get my job done.
Yeah, and I've actually, in Thiruvananthapuram, I've seen your posters everywhere. Not posters, but hoardings as well. I was quite impressed. The presence of Shashi Tharoor is very strong in the city, even now as we speak. There is one more question. I'm just getting some feedback from our producer. We'll take one more question. Okay. One more question. Good Miss Dr. Tharoor. Do you have an opinion about the... Oh, okay. We'll leave that out. That's too controversial.
I think if you could get the other question off the screen, because my face is completely blocked by it, as some of the comments have been pointing out.
Yeah. We've got it. The question is, then just take this thing off. Yeah. All right. Sorry. You're back. Can you compare Mr. Menon's advice, or we missed that? Can we go back and get that? No, it's gone. All right.
Okay, here's the question. Yeah.
Can you take it off? Take it off? I'll read it. What is, according to you, is the best way to counter negativity and hostility? I think this is a very good question, because we have a lot of that in the 21st century for some reason. How do you counterbalance or sort of neutralize?
See, when there is hostility that is coming from a serious place, from a serious person who is arguing with you on substantive grounds, my first instinct is to respond reasonably and to try and meet them on their own terms, by giving them rational arguments from my point of view. But where it's hostility and negativism merely out of either ideological fanaticism or a political agenda, like all the trolls who would attack me, even if I said, look, it's 6:33, they'll say you got a lousy watch, it's actually 6:44. You know, there are people like this in the country who will attack you, whatever you say. For those, the best thing to do is to ignore them. And I get a lot of those. I mean, if I open my timeline on social media, particularly on Twitter, where people can hide behind anonymity, I would say that a lot of these questions are, this negativism is rampant, but is not worth responding to. But let's say if a serious critic were to object negatively to something with serious arguments, and ideally in language that is not itself offensive, I'm prepared to engage, because I'm a great believer in the ancient Indian tradition of Shastrarth and Samvad. You have to argue, you have to talk, you have to persuade. I don't know if you've read Amartya Sen's wonderful book, The Argumentative Indian, but I really believe in that. I think that democracy is, as he says, an act of deliberative discussion, where you come to conclusions only by sorting out your differences, but you have to do it with a lot of mutual respect. And I think that that's something which people sometimes do not.
A little sledging, a little banter, a little sledging is fine.
I'm not a fan of sledging. I'm a cricket fanatic, and I really think the day sledging came into cricket really spoiled the game. Because I've only played amateur cricket, and that too in places like Singapore and Geneva. But I can tell you that in amateur cricket, honestly, the spirit is very different. You know, you'll come into bat, the wicketkeeper and the slips will say nice words about you. Oh, the opposing captain is here, or good to see him. We heard how he speaks. Let's see how he bats. This kind of stuff. No one sledges. Whereas some of the deeply offensive stuff that I've heard is even said in test matches, I think is really not worthy of the gentleman's game.
I'm talking about the racist abuse, and that's just a lowbrow response. I'm just talking about the interesting sledging. For example, Glenn McGrath and Edo Brandis, a Zimbabwean fast bowler who wasn't getting out. McGrath got frustrated, kept calling him fat and said, "Why are you so fat?" And his reply was, "Well, every time I make love to your wife, she gives me a biscuit." I mean, that kind of thing, it's really funny.
No, but that's pretty nasty, right? And the idea is you want the batsman to think about this fellow making love to your wife, and then you, of course, end up getting distracted and playing badly. I don't think that's reasonable.
All right, listen, we've run out of time. Just one last word as we say bye to you and thank you for your time. One word for Ayman from Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
I hope it'll be inspiring. I've seen it being inspiring. I've had an opportunity to participate in a number of Ayman events over the years, and now I even chair their advisory board. And I will say that it's inspiring to see young people getting together, discussing really significant ideas of social transformation, of geopolitical change, and of getting nations to come together to actually deal with the world as a whole. And therefore, inspiring is the word that I want Ayman to live up to. I wish Rishabh Shah and all the others at Ayman all the very best in pursuing their ideals, because youth is the right time, honestly, to pursue your ideals. Very often when you get old, you have too many responsibilities, you get to be jaded, you get to be cynical. At this particular point of your youth, as Ayman is full of college students, even high school students and university members, I would say to them, remain inspiring, inspire the young to be the best they can possibly be. And I am there in your corner rooting for you.
Well,
and of course, read my books.
Well, as we say bye to you, there are lots of requests for you to be Prime Minister and President. I think one gentleman wants you to be both. So the fans keep coming. Thank you so much, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. You can see the difference. He's got 20,000 books behind him. I have a wall. That's the difference between the intellectual and the others. Thank you.
Oh,
we'll hear from you
soon. Thank you. Good to see you.
Lovely
talking to you. Take care.